Welcome to this week 3 on MOOC course of Management Concept. In this week, we are going to reflect on the evolution of management thought, starting from the ancient times till present. We are going to reflect on the historical development of the thought. The learning outcomes for week 3 are as follows. Reflect on the chronological evolution of management theory. Understand the influential developments in management literature in a structured manner. Overview management practices before and after the Industrial Revolution, and learn the major contributions of classical era of management. We are going to first start with reflect on a question that why it is important to study the history. Well, let us understand that management is as old as human civilization. But the formal study of management based on the body of evolving knowledge is relatively new. Different phases in evolution of management thought delineates the existing body of knowledge that involves the functions, scope, and practices. The past contributes to a more logical and a coherent picture of the future, and that is why it is very important to reflect on the history. If we understand how these developments have taken place in the history, it is going to become easier for us to understand what is the present phase of management and how the future needs are predicted in an organization. The management history is divided into two broad parts. One is, we could say, that is pre-industrialization time, and one is post-industrialization. The industrialization is a major breakthrough event which divides the history into two major halves. In the first part, which is also, we can say that it is an early management thought, we could reflect on some of the ancient practices that was there before industrialization, and what were the challenges and perspectives of management during the time of industrialization. While in the second half, we are going to reflect on the modern history of management, which is very popularly known as the classical, neoclassical, and a modern school of thought. And in that, we are going to reflect on each one of these school of thoughts with the process of this course. With the time, economic, social, and political facets have been developed, and people, organizations, and management activities have evolved within the context of various cultural values and institutions throughout the history. Before industrialization, organizations were primarily the family, church, military forces, or related to government. Some of the individuals were engaged in some economic activities which were like they were doing some tailoring work or some kind of blacksmiths, barber, some cobbler, etc. These kinds of work that people were engaged in to earn their economic earnings based on the method of barter, but not on a scale comparable to what emerged after Industrial Revolution. Well, let us see some of the management practices from the pre-industrial time to understand how the scientific management has emerged. We could say that in the ancient times, the traces of management we could found in the history of pre-class societies. Pre-class societies that were surviving for the purpose of survival, and they were making all their efforts in a direction and their intellectual capabilities to develop and transform things to survive. The common human goal was to survive under the existing situations and conditions. The struggle for the survival led to the conception of a civilized society as a new stage of the world history. The birth signs of civilized society can be seen in some of the ancient practices in different contexts that we are going to reflect in this particular section. We are going to start some of the ancient practices that were found in the Babylonian civilization. Now, as we are reflecting on the formation of group, because prior to these kinds of signs that we could trace, people were individually engaged in some of the economic activities by combining their efforts and intellect with whatever manner they can develop and utilize the resources available at their end to survive. But if we could see that the group affiliation which is emerging from family to churches, the authority became a challenging task. And in families, the authority were rested with the concepts of patriarchy or matriarchy. But when we talk about an organization, the conflict of power is critical. From this conflicting idea of authority to priest or a king came into existence. And there, a king named Hammurabi in 2250 BC, he issued 282 rules regarding some business dealings, some personal behavior, interpersonal relations, punishments, and other societal matters. So we can see that these kinds of rules which were issued by the king were basically delineating about the way in which the society is going to behave and move. The Code of Law also advocates about the fixation of wages and fees for skills and labor services. Similarly, in the later years, we could see in 604 BC, where Nebuchadnezzar, another king of Babylonia, weavers of clothes were paid in food with the quantity received dependent upon each spinner's or weaver's output, meaning that the person's output dependent upon the effort that he invested into the process, and the higher number of output he can generate, the higher will be his wages, which is different from the case if we compare it with Hammurabi, because in both of these examples, in the previous case of Hammurabi, there was no incentive that will be given because the wages were regulated, while in the second case we could see that the wages are flexible and dependent upon the number of output a person could generate, hence the reward is higher. So we could see some of the early examples of bureaucratic authority and differing ideas about motivation, workplace productivity, and incentives to be given to people. We could see some of the traces of the practices of management, but not in a formal form as we could see today. But these kinds of traces will help us to understand that there was some mark of management practices. Even then, there was no concept of management emerged in those ancient times. Another evidence of management we could trace from some Chinese military organizations, where we could see that the oldest known military treatise, which is written by General Sun Tzu in 600 BC, provides some evidence of bureaucratic structures. Now, he strongly advocated strategic planning before going for any of the war. Proper kind of problems of line and staff relationship were already existing in that time as well, when they were planning, when they were deciding on how the people are going to reach out to war and how they strategize plan. In all of that, they could have also identified some problems related to delegation of the task and disseminating the kind of policy making in which they were planning to go for war conditions. So some kind of problems with the staff relationship and how this kind of hierarchy and authority will be maintained, how rules are going to be regulated, all these kinds of issues were there in the Chinese bureaucracy as well. These Chinese civil services were organized in a fully developed hierarchy of differing ranks. Confucius and his followers also have led to a lasting influence on Eastern thinking about some virtuous behavior of a leader, including benevolence towards others, logical decision making, avoiding extremes, and using merit as a basis of selection. These are also some signs that we could see in contemporary management organizations, that how to decide on the compensation parameters, how to decide that whether to reward a person and how to reward that person, how to measure the performances. So we could see these early signs in Chinese bureaucracy as well. And administering rewards and performances for appraisals and combating corruption through certain kind of rules and certain kind of order and certain kind of discipline. These were the signs that we could trace in Chinese bureaucracy as well. Another sign we could get from the Far East, that is management in early civilizations. In the case of Indian context, the Kautilya, which is in the 332 to 298 before Christ era, was a noted and a feared minister in the ministry of Chandragupta Maurya, the greatest statesman of India. He wrote Arthashastra. Now this Arthashastra is a treatise of statecraft, contained several advices on establishing and maintaining political, social and economic order. To maintain order, Kautilya advised close controls, severe punishments, the use of workplace spies and various tricks to test employee loyalty. Now at that time we have to understand that it was very difficult to find competent people, and especially the public officials, because at that time there were no organizations. So they were basically dealing with the political and kind of social issues, and these kinds of policies and policy making of a king rule and dealing with the economic order of a kingdom. Basically they were more concerned about to find more loyal people, or you could say more authentic people who could work in the public offices. Now it was very obvious to understand that human beings are really unpredictable, and these were the concerns of Kautilya as well, and on the basis of which he advocated certain kind of close controls and supervisions with the people, and also the concept of spies, so that they could get to know whether the people who are working with them are loyal to them or not. They also wrote about some desirable traits of a leaders and administrators, that how to basically select employees using some kind of interviews and checking references. Now in those references also, of course, they were looking for some word of mouth and they were also looking for some word of mouth or some kind of references. The referral system that we see today coming into the picture recently, because of technology and the growing rate of people and stakeholders getting involved into the practices of management and administration. But we could see these kinds of practices were also happening in the ancient times of management practices. So he further advocated on consulting the staff advisors, also establishing departments with the directors and preparing certain kind of job descriptions so that the right kind of hiring could be made. These are also some of the management practices which are relatable, but as again we have to understand that there was no formal system, and whatever the system was restricted towards the political and social orders. So it was not for profit making, but it is basically for maintaining an order in a state, so that a kind of a right kind of a system can be established. Another great example of management practices can be traced from the context of Egypt, wherein we could get the Egyptian marble construction and mining projects as an idea of management practices. Now, the examples of Great Pyramids of Giza or the canals of the pharaohs are stark examples to guide us towards the concept of supervision, delegation and span of control. Now, we could see that the Egyptians were aware of limits to the number of laborers one overseer can supervise. Now we could see that these kinds of constructions require certain kind of discipline, certain kind of order, some kind of control which has been established into the process of constructing these kinds of starking examples. So these are basically some outstanding examples to understand that there was certain kind of management that was practiced and was present in those times, even when people were not aware of the concept of something like management. Also, we can draw some of the leadership lessons which are coming from some great Hebrew leaders. Naming some of them is like Abraham in the 1900 BC, Joseph in 1750 BC, Moses 1300 BC, and David 1000 BC. In this era, these leaders have demonstrated the skills of leadership, in which they could show some of the evidences of their vision, justice, how humility is very important for a leader, their decision making, their confidence have created examples for leadership even for today. So there are great lessons of how to lead a team, how to lead a nation, how to lead people, and how to establish a fair and a just system. We could draw some kind of evidences of this span of control, delegation, supervision, monitoring and leadership from these kinds of leaders, and also these kinds of evidences that can be help us to understand the humanistic orientation of management and justice. Another kind of evidence we can draw from the Greek practices. Well, in Greek practices, references were traced from Socrates, which was in the 469 to 399 before Christ era, who observed that managerial skills were transferable, and later supported by a student Plato in 428 to 348 before Christ era, where they considered the human diversity as the basis for organizing work. Now this is a very essential criteria to understand that diversity was always a parameter to understand the dynamics of working with people. Whenever there are more than one human, of course you need different skills to tackle them. And when we talk about diversity, it is not only just human, but it is also different genders, different ages, different races, different cultures, different beliefs, different values. So this was also at that point of time in the Greek practices also, the focus was on understanding and responding to diversity. So human diversity was something that was also used as a basis for organizing work, so that it could be determined that how to better utilize these kinds of differences. Now diversity in itself represents the differences, and the concept of diversity in organizations highlights the importance of how these differences can be unified together for a common purpose. And this is what we could see in the Greek practices as well. And the focus was on human diversity, wherein these kinds of differences were being focused to brought together so that some kind of utilization of these abilities could be made. Further, we could see that Aristotle, a student of Plato, provided numerous insights into management and organization, which is related to such kind of practices that could be defined towards the organized system in which some kind of humanistic approaches can be adopted. In ancient Greece, we could see the first seeds of democracy and saw the advent of decentralized participatory government. When we talk about participatory government, it talks about kind of a open system in which some kind of views from, you could say, the other people in the team could be sought. So participatory management was advocated in the Greece context as well. We could see in the ancient practices that the first attempt we could establish from the individual liberty, wherein it was the beginning of the scientific methods, but it also provides some early insights into the division of labor, departmentalization, delegation of authority, and leadership skills that incorporates the vision of diversity and participatory management. So these are some early signs that we could trace from the Greek civilization. In Roman civilization, we can also identify some of the management practices which was prior to the industrialization. A quasi-factory system was established in this Roman civilization because they were more towards promoting the trade of global market, and to meet the requirement of these kinds of commercial standardization in the growing context of the trade, basically which was related to manufacturing or construction, the Romans established a guaranteed system of measures, weights and coins. Now this kind of system is obviously going to help them to focus on standardization, because there was no concept of common matrix to trade. So there has to be some kind of standardization. Now we could see this kind of practice in the Roman civilization, that how they have established some system wherein some kind of at least standards can be maintained, which is a very starking element of a organized system, where when we could see that there is no basically organizations working as formal discipline. The first form of joint stock company which were involved in fulfilling the government contracts for necessary war supplies and equipments were also created by the Romans. So we could see some form of people coming together, forming themselves as a kind of a unit and working together in a way to serve certain kind of war supplies and equipments that we could trace from the Roman civilization. And further, to meet the organizational issues, for example, policy making or certain kind of rules and procedures that has to be established to maintain a system of a standard, that could also be traced from some of the Roman practices. While if we could see, the Renaissance writers coined the phrase of Middle Ages to refer to what occurred from the decline of the Rome to the Renaissance period. Now, feudalism also prevailed as a cultural system. If we could see, feudalism is something wherein the people were tied to their lands. Fixed rigid class distinctions were there, some kind of establishment of an age of landed aristocracy that was to endure the industrial revolution. So we can summarize that the pre-industrial societies were characterized by low per capita income, economic stagnation, dependence on agriculture, little specialization of labor and limited geographic market integration. While if we could see the post-industrialized societies, they were of high capital income, economic growth, we could see some kind of freedom from agricultural land and some kind of industrial setups are being established. The concept of factory system came into picture when people started to work together, unlike the pre-industrial scenario wherein people were mostly engaged into activities at an individual level, while not working into a established system wherein people work together as an organized unit and towards a unified goal. So these were not the scenario of an organization before industrialization. However, with the passage of time, with the development of certain kind of political and economic systems, the kind of people working together started to establish, which led to the concepts of the people working together in groups, and which sow the seed of industrialization. And then of course certain kind of development started to happen that led to some kind of industrialized societies that we could see, that was started to grow, that was started to expand their functions and their practices by pooling their efforts and resources together. Now, other important contribution we cannot let go is of Adam Smith. In 1776, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nation, and in his book he argued that the economic advantages of organizations and society would gain from the concept of division of labor. So division of labor is a very important contribution of Adam Smith, which we could see had also become the foundation of many contemporary practices, and also it has made a lot of differences in the modern history of management that we will see later. But the concept of division of labor is all about job specialization, wherein some kind of job can be broken down into narrow and repetitive tasks, and this basically leads to some kind of specialization that leads to economies of large scale of production. So basically we could say by dividing the job we can gain some kind of economic advantages, and this is what a major contribution of Adam Smith, which he had discussed in his book. He has also used the example to explain this of a pin industry, wherein he claimed that the 10 people, if they are working on a specialized task, they can produce about 48,000 pins a day. While if each person worked alone and at an individual pace, if he did all the task of that job right from stage 1 to the last stage, then he would be hardly able to produce only 10 pins a day. So how much difference of it from a 10 pins to 48,000 pins? It is like it is increasing a capacity to a great height. So it's basically about a concept that has helped industries to grow and basically gain the economic advantages of large scale production. That is why it is a landmark contribution in the field of economics and management. Smith also concluded that the increased productivity by increasing each worker's skill and dexterity can save a lot of time in changing tasks, because if like one person is performing the same task from starting to end, then he has to change his way of doing every process, and every step of a production is different, and it requires a different element of force and different element of a focus. So if a person is doing the same task, he is more able to develop specialization rather than focusing on different tasks and complete one whole unit of production. So it is going to save a lot of time. The contribution of division of labor leads to saving a lot of time, and also it will save a lot of labor effort, because some kind of machines will be invented, some kind of labor saving inventions will help this process of division of labor as well. So it's basically a philosophy that acts as a crucial foundation for the modern management practices, and that is why Adam Smith's contribution cannot be ignored when we are talking about the ancient practices of management and also the concept which led to industrialization. So it is somewhere we could say that is helping the organizations to understand that how the productivity can be improved and how the time could be saved. There are two things to understand here, that it is not only the advantages of the large scale production only in terms of the cost that it can be reduced, but it is also saving a lot of time and a labor effort. That is why it is very important contribution. Now let us understand the industrial revolution, the kind of challenges and the perspectives in this phase. The pre-industrial societies had been mentioned that they were characterized by some low capital income, some kind of stagnation in economy, some kind of dependence on agriculture because of feudal character of the system, some little specialization of labor because there were no skills and people were not properly kind of trained, and there were limited opportunities of market segmentations. While if we compare it with industrial societies, it is industrial societies, some kind of society which is basically economically growing, which is expanding, which is having a high per capita income, which is less dependent on agriculture and more on an industrial setup, which is focusing on specialization of labor, which is also talking about spreading the market segmentation geographically. So there is a difference between a pre-industrial scenario that we have learned from the ancient practices, wherein some traces of management practices were there, some concept of social and political and economic order were there, but the concept of working in an organization and in a industry setup was not there, because that is not the concept in the ancient times. In ancient times, people were mostly engaged in individual activities, while post-industrialization, people were working together in organizations as open systems, which were affected by the environmental changes and the managerial decision making, and all these kinds of systems which we are learning from the initial discussion on management to understanding the what was happening in the history. So what we have tried to understand is that a series of technological advances were going on in the late 18th century in Great Britain. It started, and it marked the beginning of this industrial revolution, which later spreaded gradually over to Europe, to United States, and then across the other parts of the world. It was an era of major mechanization and innovation, because there were landmark of developments in the technology were happening. With the passage of growth of the economic system, of the social system, the way in which the activities were expanding, there were a lot of inventions were happening during that time, not just only in the field of economics, not just only in the field of social system, but also in the engineering fields were developing, and they were making some landmark inventions which were helping these achievements of economic advantages, and that were helping that how we can reduce the labor work, how we can increase the productivity, how the efficiency and effectiveness can be brought in the working system of people. So these were kind of developments that were happening in this era of time, which we called as industrial revolution. If we look at some key changes that happened during this revolution are the substitution of the machine power for the human, animal, wind, water and other natural sources of energy. Because obviously we can understand in the prior times, the force along with the labor force was the natural resources that were being incorporated into the labor and efforts to transform one raw material into some kind of a finished product. But the industrial revolution, and because of this technological growth and because of this kind of inventions that were happening at that point of time, it substituted these kind of powers to some mechanistic power. And the use of steam and later other kind of power inventions. So steam engine was also introduced in that time, which obviously has helped to provide the supply of power and to the machines for better and speedy work that was happening in the systems, and of course the adoption of the factory system. Now factory system is basically a major landmark of industrial revolution, wherein improvements in technology made it possible that the large combination of physical and the human resources, wherein some kind of standardized goods were able to go for mass production in large quantities. So these were some kind of inventions and some kind of changes that were happening at the time of industrial revolution. Now of course, when these changes are happening, when a system is transforming from not so established to a established system wherein some kind of inventions are taking place, of course there will be certain kind of challenges that we cannot ignore, and that is why it is very important to reflect on those challenges as well. So let us reflect on some of the managerial issues that were experienced during the industrial revolution, wherein the time of transformation shifting from a pre-industrialized societies to industrialized system, wherein people were working in individual systems, to coming together as a group and started to work in a factory system. So we could see some of the managerial issues that had arisen. If we could see that a large number of companies have sparked a competitive environment, and thus the economies of scale became a critical challenge. Now, if we look at this scenario wherein people have started to, work on large scale productions, that people wanted to reap the benefits of those economic advantages, basically we could see that of course a huge competitive environment had been created. And when such kind of competitiveness is created, it is very important for every unit who is into this process to specialize, to work better, and of course this will create a lot of other issues which may lead to managing those kinds of systems, then proper planning, all these kinds of organizing the resources, and of course the resources were not available in that frame which was the need of that hour. If we could see some of the issues related, that is with the growth of organizations, the challenges to recruit more people was the first important issue that has arisen. It is like when people were working individually, they were working in a similar manner, but when you started to work and when you focus on the large scale number of production, of course you need more people. So the first need, if we didn't look around that what were the issues when the people started to work together, the first issue in itself is to hire people. Like you have to get a more number of people to work with you. That is one of the challenge. So it is like to recruit more people, that is one thing, and to motivate them to work is another thing, because we could say that at that point of time there was shortage of skilled labor. So labor could be available because people were there who were looking for working into a factory system because it has started to establish, but we could say that there was a very important shortage of the skilled labor, because when you are talking about working with machines, you need to have certain kind of skills to use them. And of course when the people are shifting and transforming from a pre-industrialized time wherein people were more used to of a agrarian nature of production system, and now shifting to a industrial system which is more mechanical in nature, the kind of habits, the kind of tendency of people to work, their reluctance to go for change and adapting into a mechanical environment, it was difficult to motivate them. So the one of the challenge is to hire people and hire more number of people, and people were not used to work together. So that is also one of the challenging system, to make people work together and of course motivate them together and bring them together to serve for a unified purpose is becoming a very challenging situation at that point of time. Then we could say that the laborers who were accustomed to domestic and agrarian life were not easily adapting to these kinds of monotonous mechanical works, and of course the issues of discipline and punctuality were affecting in the initial years. So because it was very difficult for people to get into that discipline and get into that frame of mind to work together for the purpose of serving to some common goal, because at that point of time they were very irregular, the rate of absenteeism was high, people were working and then they they are going to absent for a longer period of time and then they come back to time. So there were irregularities in the nature of people who were working together at that time. So it was difficult to establish the factory system. People were not skilled if they were available in masses. People were not able to be punctual and not disciplined because of the system that they were shifting from a domestic system to a mechanical system. So it was difficult for people also to adapt themselves into a situation. Moreover, there was a issue of planning, organizing and controlling the operations in those early enterprises that was emerging because of the factory system getting established. Another major issue was that training become a challenge. Now training was becoming a challenge for people, because as we say that the laborers were not skilled, so we can train them, but the point is that the people were not very literate also. So illiteracy was uncommon at that point of time, and the only medium of train people is by demonstration or by some kind of a instruction, and they cannot be trained in an organized manner because they were not literate. So the basic education was also lacking. We could say the skills were not there, education was not there, people were more comfortable in their domestic systems, they had no idea of the mechanical system of working, they were not used to work with machines, they were irregular, there was a issue of discipline, there were issue of motivation, people were not motivated enough to come and work in this kind of system that they have never seen before. Plus there were issues of absenteeism also. So all these kinds of issues required a skilled manager to um, manage all these kinds of things. So there was not only a issue of the people who will work and the kind of employees in an organization, but we could say that the skilled managers were also required, and the skilled managers were also short at that point of time because the system was not there. So when we say that it was a transforming system that was happening from a no system to some factory system, in this phase there were many managerial issues that were arising, because when you started to establish something right from the scratch, it becomes difficult for you to nurture those philosophies and values because there is no example to look up to. So when we talk about looking into a novel perspective, we need to look for some kind of path breaking changes, and in that way industrial system has contributed a lot in this transformation of pre-industrial scenario to post-industrial scenario, which we popularly call as the modern history of management. Thus, we could say that the emergence and refinement of these managerial economies requires managers to be more creative and better informed about how they can effectively manage the resources, because when a system started to establish, the need of management is more and more required, and people need more creativity to manage and handle these kinds of changes, because we are talking about mechanistic system coming into picture, but it is also the people that has to be handled, and that is why management is a art wherein you need to be creative enough to motivate people to engage their efforts in a similar and desirable manner towards a unified goal. So we could say that naturally, as a business grows, an entrepreneur acting alone cannot direct and control all of the activities, and therefore there is a requirement to hire people who can delegate these tasks and to their subordinates, and a business first non-owner employees, which is the manager. So before industrial revolution, the economic theory focused only on the two factors of production, which was land and labor. But with the advent of the factory system, we could say the capital became the third factor, while facing those managerial issues. The fourth factor became very important, that was the management, and management became an indispensable need of the hour. That helped us to understand that why we are talking about the modern history of management, because there were various changes that were happening in the time of industrialization, and these changes led us to understand the importance of management as a very important factor, and thus human resources becomes an indispensable factor of production at that point of time. And through these kinds of ancient practices, we have reflected on the traces of management. So we could say that in this video what we have focused on the ancient practices that gives us some early signs of management, and which gives us a hint that even when there was no system of an organization, but there was a system of politics, there was a system of economic order, there was a system of social issues that was handled by their then leaders, their then kings and the rulers, and they tried to establish some certain kind of laws and order to establish those systems, which gradually became a factory system in the industrialization time, and the people shifted from agrarian culture, from a concepts of slavery to a concept of employment contract and conditions, and this is how the kind of a system of organizations came into being. Thank you.